We have a very interesting panel because we have people coming from very different universe, from banks to innovative Chinese company, professors and platform apps builders. So it will give us an opportunity to dive into platform business models. And I will start with a quick question to Jeff, our enlightenment expert. So can you very quickly and very pragmatically explain what fundamentally makes platforms different from traditional business models? And I would insist on one point also, is that it's a very chic conference, so we talk a lot about platforms, and there is a word that we haven't mentioned a lot this morning, which is online marketplaces. We just heard it a little bit from Terry, but it's good to remind everyone that at the heart of a platform, there is a transactional marketplace of people, of products, of services. So specifically, Jeff,
that's a really good point. So
if you can take this to start.
Yeah, so most, if not all, platforms are involved in matching users to try to exchange some element of value. So they really are in the business of setting up a market. So even a YouTube, when you go to consume a YouTube video, there are hundreds of millions, if not billions. Nobody could ever sort through all of that. So the system is actually going to do that matching for you. And then to the extent that it learns a lot about you, it can create more value. So that's a fundamental of platforms. But I think the other part that's equally important is the idea that these things are open to broader participation than a traditional supply chain. Supply chains tend to be sort of long-term contract, very directed by potentially a brand name, whereas platforms tend to open themselves to innovation that they don't know where it's going to come from and what it's going to do, and so we call that permissionless innovation. And that's this idea that people can take technologies, repurpose them, and then reach markets across the systems. And that's, I think, incredibly revolutionary because you can end up growing in directions that you never would have anticipated as kind of a core firm, and then you can participate in the growth of those markets as sort of the orchestrator of that ecosystem. I don't know if I hit the points, but you can probe more.
We'll dive into it with Mark. Pragmatically, how does operating a platform or a marketplace of services has brought you competitive advantages, allowing you to upset incumbents or create more value than traditional models? Can you give a concrete example where you say, wow, that's really creating value?
Well, I can try at least. First of all, I think many people don't know what intelligent apps is. I think some of you who are from Germany know MyTaxi. It's like a taxi dispatcher company which works as a platform model. So that's one of our product portfolio companies. And I think many people won't realize two things. A, it's exponential growth. I mean, you touched on it. And once you operate on two-sided marketplace, what does MyTaxi do? We're nothing but a transportation broker. So we have taxi drivers on our platform and we have consumers, and all we do is broker supply and demand on our platform at a given price, at a given certain point of time, in a given location. Once you do this really well, and once you scale that both two-sided marketplace, it sort of gets a self-enforcing flying wheel. And if we look at numbers, we will have added in the last 14 months the same absolute tour value than we did in the first 8 years of our existence. So, and we'll do this again in the next 18 months. So we are growing at a pace that basically we're doubling our size every year, which means that we're making more volume than all the other years basically combined, at least from our incubation. Having said that, we are basically disrupting the whole transportation market when it comes to taxi or private hire. Actually, 60% of our total tours of the portfolio we're doing now in South America are happening because we don't, as also was mentioned with Alibaba, we don't deploy a single driver. We don't have a single car on our balance sheet. We don't have a single consumer that actually has a contract with us except from accepting our terms and conditions. And having this very asset-light operating model allows us to over-invest into technology, into people, into, let's say, marketing invest for driving that growth of that marketplace, right? And this is a very, let's say, unfair competitive advantage further against a very fragmented market of taxi dispatcher companies where we are just aggregating this whole market.
Can I actually just say one word, because it's incredible what you do, which is the platform solves this hyper-local matching problem, and so you can do prediction around where the rider's going to be, where the driver's going to be, and do matching that, as you say, no dispatcher could ever compete with, and that's shared platform technology.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, and the thing is, the beauty of it is, the bigger it gets, the better gets the service, right? I mean, it's all about ETA, so estimated time of arrival estimation. It's all about optimizing routing for traffic. It's optimizing price points for drivers and for passengers. Well, not in Germany, because there we have the regulated pricing, but in many other markets where we're competing, we're completely flexible on pricing.
So you highlight something which is very important, I believe, in when we talk about platforms and online marketplaces. It's speed to market, high growth. I see it with some of the customers that we provide our technology with. Within 6 months, they're basically able to expand their product catalog faster than they've done in 20 years, or add more services that they could ever hire people. And speaking of growth, Alibaba, you've shared a very striking view of how fast things can go. Can you let's imagine we are in a board meeting at Alibaba, and you know, you're looking at B2B industries, distribution, for example, that you are disrupting, and you look at the traditional players that on paper could be your competitors. What do you tell yourself at Alibaba? Like, there's no chance they'll ever catch up. We have such a strong model, and the best they can do is to try and join Alibaba. We're going to eat them all. Basically, can you be stopped?
So that's a lot of questions. First of all, we don't look at those companies as competitors. A lot of people compare us to Amazon.
Grainger in the US is not a competitor.
Which one?
Like a company like Grainger in the US, which was the #1 distributor of professional supplies for many years.
It's like a great company to get on our marketplace. A lot of people compare us to Amazon. That's a complicated comparison, but Amazon sells on our platform in China. We want to help other companies on our platform become Amazons. So we're not trying to defeat these competitors, we're trying to enable them. We are really focused on inclusive enablement and making it easier for sellers and buyers to work together. That's how we tick, that's how we do business. So, it's not about trying to stop us. I don't think it's about trying to stop platforms. I don't think there would be any reason to try to stop platforms, because platforms do something very well. Eric touched on it, Jeff, you've touched on it. Platforms do something more effectively than any single company or business can do. Platforms actually enable the marketing value proposition at scale. The marketing value proposition for everyone, just going back to Business 101, choose your target customer, decide which of her needs or wants you believe you can better service, produce that service or product, communicate that service or product, and start over again, the virtuous cycle. Platforms do this much better than any individual company, because you bring in thousands of participants who are smarter than you, and they are looking out for new value proposition, new ways to do it, and then you bring in data. So platforms perform a better way at delivering value to consumers and businesses. So why would you ever want to stop them?
So, Marcus, you are the only representative on this panel of a company that's older than 20 years old. So
I
congratulations.
think the MIT is also older than 20 years.
Yeah, it's an institution. It's an institution. So we're having a platform model discussion, and from the perspective of a traditional company like Deutsche Bank, is the platform discussion more a business model discussion, or fundamentally more a cultural discussion? Meaning, how can traditional organizations who are often, more risk-averse than new entrants can really succeed in making that shift?
Yeah, I think it's both. was mentioned already a couple of times today that the banking industry is susceptible to the platform revolution. I personally believe we are somewhere on the eve of it. It's a highly fragmented industries. Eric mentioned this morning that the products, I think it was free, perfect, and instant. I think banking products there are some already free. I think they are fully digitalized, so they are perfect, and they are more and more instant. So I think all the ingredients from a strategic point of view are there, that the banking industry will also become a platform industry. And very often it's mentioned that it's the regulation that protects us. Jeff and myself had great discussion about Payment Service Directive 2. Yeah. It is the biggest game changer, because now the industry is asked to open up their accounts, giving access to third party to the data. So from a strategic point of view, I see many, many upsides. Sure, there are also some new competitors, but the banking industry is much bigger than retail payment and, for example, retail personal installment loans. So there are huge profits. And on the other hand, customers are just asking for it. I very much like the example of Peter Altmaier this morning with the different kind of apps from the car manufacturers and from the air carriers. I think the same holds true for the financial service. Many of us have a couple of bank relations, a couple of financial service providers, but there's a clear trend we can already experience in our customer base, that customers want to have one app. They want to have one access to all their financial service needs. So, for example, we have 8 billion of assets in our online mobile banking that are non-Deutsche Bank products, just aggregated there. You don't even have to open the apps of our competitors to do transaction. You can directly do it from our app. So I think these are just the first examples how it's moving there. And then to your question, when you are clear on your business strategy, you have to adopt the organization. I think this is very important. You need different kind than today's organization, where you more have these silos. And then I think the new culture is somehow of the outcome of this entire process. And there my favorite is from Jeff's book that I think banks, for the last 10 years, we were under financial crisis. And when you're under financial crisis, it's all about efficiency. It's all about deploying your internal resources as efficient as possible. When it's about platform, it's about effectively orchestrating your partners. And I think this is the biggest shift. This is the biggest mindset change we have to handle as a banks. And as there are many competitors out there, I think there's many, many upsides for banks that are moving fast here.
So maybe I'll just to follow up. When it comes to making that change within a large traditional organization, who drives the change? How do you actually get it to happen? Is it the CEO? Is it the board? Is it someone cool within the organization who's going to speak up? Is it because often, like, we engage with a lot of companies who are coming to us to say we are thinking of building a platform, we're thinking of building a marketplace, and sometimes we have a lot of conversations with a group, and the group next door is not even aware of what's happening. And sometimes the CEO says it's great, and it goes down to the level below, and people are focused on their daily job, and they don't want to take the risk of implementing something that might upset the organization. So what's your take on that?
I think it's never wrong to say you need the support of the board, but I think it's not sufficient. One of the key ingredients of digitalization is peer-to-peer, is the crowd. And I think every employee of Deutsche Bank is very digital, at least from his personal point of view. The key question, how can you bring all these capabilities into the bank? And then I think it's less about classical competencies like data or like doing engineering stuff. This all can be trained. I think the key point is then again the mindset, because when you're in the crisis, it's all about doing things right. The things you have done for the last 10 years or longer. When it's about platform economy, when it's about digitalization, it's about doing the right things. So how do you get the incentives right? How do you get this try and error culture? And I think you can't change an entire organization overnight. We at Deutsche Bank, we built up a kind of a digital factory where we have 800 people. They are working totally different. So this was the first step, and now the second and the third has to come. And I very much like the example of Eric this morning, that it takes 30 years. I don't think that we have 30 years, but I'm also very conscious that it's not a question of a couple of weeks or months. So it will be a multi-year journey.
Okay, so maybe going back to you, Mark, when you, from a view from a disruptor with your apps, how do you how do you advise or would advise incumbents, traditional companies to go about accelerating a platform transformation?
I worked for an incumbent many years ago. I actually was head of strategy when I was 27 for Otto. It's a large retail conglomerate. Back then, that was the early 2000s. We already came up with the idea. Actually, the head of the online platform, Thomas Schnieders, came up with the idea with a marketplace. That was 2002. That was way before Amazon ever thought about launching it in Germany. I think they didn't even want it in the US yet. But I personally came to the conclusion that we had all the right ideas, we had all the right technology, but there was so much resistance to change. And you look at physics, in German we call it Trägheit der Masse, I don't know what the English term for it, which just means if you stir like a pot, it takes ages till the whole thing starts circling. It is just, I came to the conclusion that the digital transformation of an incumbent doesn't work. It's a very frustrating thing because you might have the right ideas, it might be even supported by the CEO, but changing 30,000 people in an organization is extremely difficult to do, and typically you don't have the time that it needs to transform the organization and still be competitive in the market. So having now worked for 10 years in pure digital companies, this pace of decision making is completely different from an incumbent, and also the risk appetite is completely different, because typically if you are a disruptor, what you're disrupting is your core business, so you have everything to lose. So you do everything to win. If you're an incumbent, typically if you change, you have a lot to lose in your existing business and only very little uncertain to win in the sort of disrupting part that you're looking at. So I think the effort that you need to put in there and the risk appetite that you need and the fear of losing everything that you have built in the existing business is just too high. So I think transformation becomes very, very complex. It's not that people don't want to. I think there are just so many hurdles to overcome and so much change to go through that it is just too, it's too much hassle. I think people can't do it.
So you bring up the question of risk, and we all know that it's a large driver or non-driver of change. Terry, at Alibaba, there is the magic flywheel effect of platforms that we've talked about, that we described. But what I'd be interested in is, from an investment mindset, are they, in a ways, investments you sacrifice or things a traditional company would invest in that you don't do to avoid stopping the flywheel effect? And yesterday we talked and I was explaining how, for example, on Amazon, a lot of the product pages are not necessarily the nicest in the world, but Amazon chooses to keep on facilitating the accumulation of products rather than investing massively in making it more complicated to have products to sell. So from an Alibaba perspective, maybe in a different way, but are they things where you choose growth over how a traditional company would act?
So first I would say, I remember that marketplace, Shopping 24.
No, that's even different. We called it one-stop shopping.
Even before Shopping 24.
24 was an aggregator. Also an interesting idea. Also didn't scale because we weren't aggressive enough.
I was at Amazon then, and we participated on Shopping 24, so I do remember those discussions. It is hard, just to that point, it is so hard as the incumbent, exactly as you said. I see this so often, so many times. Startups have nothing to lose, everything to gain. The incumbents have thousands of employees, and so much to lose and a big risk of winning. So, to your question for us, investment, obviously I can't say much about our investment strategies because they're future-looking strategies that are confidential. When we do invest, we will invest like we did in the case of Lazada. I mentioned it's one of our platforms in Southeast Asia, when we say, here's a team that's built a good platform and marketplace model in a way that feels similar to us. We could do that ourselves, but why not join forces with them and do so? So we would invest, I would say, pragmatically, and we'd maybe invest in technology or in people and things like that. But we do a lot, we really do a lot homegrown. Again, because of what I was explaining before, we've always worked with partners. It's so interesting for me when I compare the different companies I've had the privilege to work for. If you start as a company that is just enabling partners, you will always think about it that way, your DNA that way, and it's so hard to change the people in the company, especially in big companies. We would be very challenged to change our culture, But our culture, fortunately, is always about working with partners and enabling them. So whether it's investment or how we go global, we look to growth through growing with partners as opposed to having everything in a closed silo or in a closed marketplace. That's really our philosophy.
I think that's a very good philosophy. So just looking at the poll, it's actually interesting. 46% of you here are experimenting with platform business models in parts of your business. So that seems to be like a interesting and encouraging start. And maybe going back to you, Marcus, when I prepared this panel, I spoke to your colleague, and one thing he said which struck me was people are buying financial services from companies that are not banks or not resellers of financial services. So why wouldn't a bank sell products that are not financial services? And he was telling to me, our goal at Deutsche Bank is to set up an online marketplace where ultimately people could potentially come and buy a TV because we know them, we know what they like, and they trust us. This seems like an interesting radical change, one that I would really encourage, but can you talk about it more?
Sure. We ask ourselves the question, what is the platform economy for us as Deutsche Bank? And I think it's not we are building a mobility platform because there's no linkage to our overall business model. I think the answer is threefold, and one of them is the point you have touched in your question. First of all, there are so many producers of banking products out there, like deposits products. We decided as Deutsche Bank that you also can buy deposits products from third party in the mobile banking of Deutsche Bank. Not every bank is allowed to put their deposits into our platform, but we are doing a kind of curation because it's very important that when there's Deutsche Bank on the outside, that there's also Deutsche Bank quality on the inside. One example. The second one is, and I think this is the biggest downside of the entire financial crisis, not all the litigations we have to pay, but that we have lost a decade in building up new businesses. I think there is no rule that says banks can only do deposit business, credit business, and securities investment business. Where's the fourth pillar? And this is the data-driven businesses, where I think it's totally right, and that's also my responsibility in Deutsche Bank to build up our own pillar called Digital Ventures, where we opened up our DB API, where third-party developers can build their product on base of the platform. And I think it's important that you somehow link it to the account data because there is so much insight there. We already have launched a couple of products like contract optimization for utilities, or all German customers next year have the opportunity to link their income tax statement with the account. So for Germans, it's very cumbersome, at least for me, on one weekend on April or May, to find all the data I have to type into my income statement. And this will be pre-filled by the data from our account. And probably it's not the TV in the beginning, but I think there are many, many adjacent services you can provide. And then you can also get a kind of commission income, which is very, very attractive for a bank, both from a growth but also from a profitability point of view. And I think the most powerful is the third one. One of the sponsors is Verimi. It's here on the board. Together with 11 other German companies, we are building an identity platform because I think one thing is obvious. Many classical companies that do not have this growth perspective from the capital markets, they are not capable of doing this platform on their own. They have to find the right partners. And this is somehow the threefold answer on how we see the platform evolving. So if you're waiting for your TV recommendation, I have to disappoint you. There will be no TV recommendation next year because I think there are so many services that are closer to what Deutsche Bank stands for.
Okay, thanks. So we have 5 minutes left. I'm going to try to open a very flash debate. When I started Miracle 7 years ago, people told me, Adrian, you want to provide technology to help other people create marketplace, but there's already eBay and Amazon. There will never be other marketplaces. So now we are 200 clients later, including industrial companies, retailers, distributors. Recently, Siemens launched a great marketplace called Easy Spares Marketplace for spare parts. So it's very exciting to live this revolution from the inside. And going back to your point, Jeff, of how to play in the platform economy, one of the things you said was be a platform, and you can see that 45% of the people here are already experimenting. at the same time, Terry is trying to get people to join their platform. Others are trying to create their platform. What we're seeing is that banks are creating platforms. So it feels, in a way, more optimistic about the ability of having a world with small, large, medium platforms, communicating together, experimenting with the model, going full speed into the model. And it's an open question for all of you, but are there specific prerequisites that you would put in the ingredients list to be able to envision becoming a platform or adding a platform or marketplace element to your business? And anyone who wants to jump in, it's the final bouquet.
Final one. I have a very simple one. It takes 1 minute. We just said there are no small platforms in any given selected markets because platforms always live from supply and demand being sufficiently there to make it fly. So we say in any market that we enter, if we cannot be number one or have a relative market share of 50% of the number one, we shouldn't be in there. So that's the only thing that matters.
But it could be a niche platform. You could be number
within
one
any given relative
in a niche.
market, right? So if you define your market very precisely, yes, but in that market you still need to be number one or at least half the size of the number one to be relevant. For mobility, maybe it's not true for the others.
Given, but this idea of it could be a niche where if you add real strong intrinsic value in that niche, then it can be small. But I agree with your point about number one because of the network effect. But I think it's fascinating to think about all the things that there could be platforms to make it easier for you to do something. And it might be a niche that is simply not interesting for bigger players to say, I want to be exactly there. When I think of one example, I know the question was posed to Jeff, so I feel a little bit bad right now. But, let me just finish this one thought. A lot of big platforms, not to mention specific companies, did not succeed in expanding their platforms to certain categories of e-commerce, for example. Partly because they had a vision about how they wanted to do it, and they stuck with that vision, and that's been great. And yet, they were not willing to change their marketplace to be optimized for how consumers want to engage with a certain product category. And that led to other players being more successful in those categories. So it is possible to do if you do it better for that specific consumer need or business need or category.
Both great points. So I'd actually offer another organizational form, though, for platforms. So these are both where you're going to sort of be the platform. I think a lot of opportunity exists for partnering to say, look, we've both got, say, 50% of the customer relationships, and we can either go into this market and kind of battle to the death and kill each other, or we can set up a joint venture, build the infrastructure, share it, make that sort of how we transact with customers, and then share in kind of the upside and the ownership. So Visa, for example, is a good example of that, where the banks, you know, it made no sense for every bank to have its own payment network and to develop that technology. That's crazy. And so they stepped back, joint sponsored, and then had a platform that went to a market. So I think that's sort of one area, and you kind of step it and say, if I've got a lot of the customer relationships, I've got a chance of winning that battle, great, go ahead. If I don't, maybe we've got multiple players, we should be in some sort of JV, joint venture. Or maybe I'm just going to end up being small enough, but I've got some specific technology advantage, you know, maybe some intellectual property, and then I can sell through the platform, but still maintain a customer presence. So there are lots of different ways that you could say.
But maybe on your point, when you decide to embrace the platform economy, does it mean that you necessarily need to become a platform, or you can just have elements of platforms in you?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's more of the mindset of how do I leverage this technology for the cost savings and the performance improvements, and how do I think about the data? And then in my organization, you know, lots of businesses have all these data silos. Well, that doesn't really work in this world of artificial intelligence and machine learning. So even to become sort of platform ready, you've got a lot of infrastructure work to do to sort of build across the different units, and a lot of data architecture work to do. And that's why firms like yours and yours who grew up this way have significant advantages where you don't have kind of this legacy technology stack that a lot of incumbent firms have to deal with.
Another thing would be core competency you need be a participant. So one of your three was participate in a platform.
absolutely.
One of the things that we certainly see when we bring great European brands to China is that to succeed on our platform, for example, you have to learn how to work with third-party agencies who manage your store, because most brands here don't have Chinese customer service, they're in the wrong time zone, all these things. So an actual core competence to succeed as a participant in the platform is learning how to allow your brand to be managed by a third-party company, who's not our company, not your company. And if you don't do that right, everything else can be perfect, you will fail.
It's a great example, and actually I just worked with a firm in the last several months, and they were looking in their ecosystem, and there were these agents there. And so their first instinct was, we're going to build a platform, and we're going to wipe the agents out, because that's an inefficiency. And I said, well, you could do that, but you could also make them successful. You could take down their costs and make them your biggest marketing engine. And happily, they chose the latter.
I hate to have to end this very interesting conversation, but I'm also very proud that a panel run by a Frenchman actually ended up on time in Germany.
Great job.
Thank you.
Good job.
Thanks to all of you.
That was a good
And let's continue the conversation.